what does actually trauma mean and what does it look like in everyday life?
For sure, and I think that's such a beautiful and important question because very often people think of trauma and say, "Oh, something huge happened and we didn't know how to cope, and that's trauma."
When we are going through all these anxieties and everything, we often feel very stuck, heavy, and it might be too late.
Instead of in that moment giving into, "Oh my god, I just need to end it or stop it or whatever," to say, "That's the anxiety speaking because I need to control it."
The first step to take to come over any kind of trauma.
See, I always say the first step is choice, right? Awareness and choice. You need to be aware that you want to heal and you need to choose to want to heal.
You must have heard the word trauma. It's everywhere now in articles, reels, therapy memes, thrown around like a just another buzzword. But do you actually know what it means, what it looks like in the real life, in everyday choices, triggers, and relationships? Today, we are breaking it down. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Her Way Unfiltered. And today, joining us is Lion Pius. She is a trauma focused psychologist, marriage and family therapist, and founder of The Unopened Box. Hi, Lian, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Shirley. Thank you so much for having me. I'm extremely excited to be here.
Thank you. So, before we dive in, I want to ask you this. For someone who has never met you, how would you introduce yourself beyond just your title? Like, who are you as a person and what has your journey been like?
I like this question because I like, being known outside of my titles. So I think I'd call myself a healer. I would also call myself a cycle breaker because that's a large part of the journey I have taken, the person I am, and the kind of people I work with. I would also call myself someone who's a really, really old soul because I always feel like this really old person in this younger person's body, eventually getting old body. But my reason for saying this is I knew I wanted to be a therapist at the age of 13. I was very clear about it, and I don't think I ever wavered. I come from a family of doctors, so everyone expected me to become a doctor, and I was like, no, finished doing my PCME and said, I still want to be a therapist. Did my undergrad and still want to be a therapist. Eventually became a trauma therapist. And I think even now, every day, wake up at 8 a.m. for my session. I mean, wake up way early for an 8 a.m. session, feeling completely excited, happy, and pumped to do the work that we do. So, has it been an easy journey? Not really. 13-year-old me did not think I'd be a trauma therapist. 13-year-old me did not ever think I would do an IIM, incubation to become a therapist. I did not think business was part of it or anything was part of it. So, it has been a journey of many curveballs. And I think the beauty of it is another tag I would use for myself is probably someone who's very resilient because that's something I didn't just learn on my own and study in college. It was also a large part of the kinds of people I met, the kind of journey I went on, the kind of work that I do every single day. Science, how it influenced myself.
You said at 13, you realized that you wanted to be a therapist. What happened at that moment that made you realize that this is what I want to do?
So I had a very close cousin who was going through a lot. And I remember he'd gone to see a therapist. I didn't know what a therapist was back then. And he went to see a therapist and he came back and he spoke to me and he said, My God, you shared so much with me that I was able to understand and you're not even a therapist. So I'm like, what is this? And then he said, Oh, a therapist is whatever. And he described what a therapist was according to him. And I was very intrigued. And eventually I had friends who were studying to be therapists, much older friends. And they told me about it. And I'm like, hey, I did not even know this was a thing I could do. Right. I didn't even know it was a profession because back then I don't think it was even something people talked about in India. And it just sounded really marvelous. And I got committed to it, read the books, did different parts of studies, and eventually made my way towards here.
Yeah, I think while growing up, the only three titles which we used to hear is doctor, lawyer, engineer.
Yes. Divang. Yeah, no one even heard of it, let alone in our context. And I think the important part for me was that it meant so much, right? So when you come from a family of healers, dad's a pediatrician, mom's a family physician, where you're so used to being in it. And I also can't stand blood, so that might have been a huge reason. And I realized I loved listening to people. I loved people. I loved hearing, and very naturally, people, even till date, I can go in a cab or an auto and someone will tell me their life story that's super deep. And I'm like, oh, okay, I just now believe it's something I was meant to do. Like it's a calling and a vocation. More than a job that I said, oh, whatever, let's figure it out. So for me, it's a very deep vocation. Calling.
Wow, that is very beautiful journey. A very interesting and beautiful journey. Okay, so we often hear the word trauma, and this is what you specialize in as well. But uh, for a layman person, what does actually trauma mean, and what does it look like in everyday life?
For sure. And I think that's such a beautiful and important question because very often people think of trauma and say, oh, something huge happened and we didn't know how to cope, and that's drama. And the sad part is, with time, we realize trauma is not so sparse, right? It's a lot more frequently occurring, it's a lot more natural. And whether we like it or not, it often does occur in our everyday life, right? So, trauma is basically when our nervous system is so overwhelmed that it doesn't know how to respond or cope with the current situation that's ongoing that is stressful. So, on that note, trauma in everyday life could be something like, say, someone a child who's experienced extreme neglect in their family. That could be traumatic because while for the parents, it may be, hey, we provided them with a roof over their head, they have food, they have shelter, clothing, what more they need, they went to school, right? But part of it could be emotional needs, emotional connection, especially for affection, for safety, wanting to be seen and supported. And it's so sad because it's so underrated, yet so very crucial in complex trauma, right? So, needs for affection, needs for love, reciprocity, which over time, as they grow up, become things that show up in their relationships. And without realizing it, those needs may turn into different forms of avoidance, aggression, etc., that in different forms shape their way of responding to the world, not just in a relationship, but also in a professional setting. Also, possibly with friends and other people, because you end up choosing people whose nervous systems are similar to your own. It's a lot of impact.
Yes, yes, that's true. So, okay, there is this idea that if something didn't happen to you, you shouldn't feel broken. But the emotional wounds aren't always visible, right? So, what would you say to someone who's constantly invalidates their own pain?
So, I'm going to answer this in three parts. And if I miss anything out, please come back to it. But part one is trauma doesn't necessarily have to be a direct experience.
Oh.
Meaning you don't have to have been in an accident, right? You don't have to be in a man-made or natural calamity, right? Trauma can also be vicarious. Say, for example, what's happening in Gaza right now is affecting everyone across the world,
Right.
right? And I have little children who used to come to me, so I work with children as well. And I had kids who'd write their names on their hands. And initially I said, hey, what's happening here? Why are we writing it? And one of my boys said, so tomorrow if I die, my parents know. Oh, no. At that point, I was like, oh, okay. And I had to process that because he's heard his parents who are journalists talk about this. Right? Both parents are journalists. And for them, it's work and it's conversation without realizing that this little kid is listening and absorbing it. And other little kids like him are listening in school and also absorbing it. And they're doing these things that their parents may say, oh, he's being so attention seeking. Oh, he's reacting so funnily. Like, I don't know why he's doing this. Because, of course, they don't realize as part of their jobs that this could be affecting them. But emotionally, he's fearful. Emotionally, he's not sure because in some country somewhere, you're hearing that these things are happening to little children. Right? And it's a lot more widespread. It is vicarious. You're listening to someone say it and you're observing it. But that can also be trauma.
Oh, wow. Oh my God.
And all of us are also experiencing it, even as adults, right? Suddenly everyone's emotionally overwhelmed from 10 minutes on Instagram. You're consuming so much overwhelm and you're not sure why you're tired at the end of the day or why you're triggered or why you're just becoming an angry person. But there's so much bombardment of your emotions and it's so much of controlled by what other people are saying that your ability to regulate, which earlier was a newspaper early in the morning, is now consistent through the day all the time. And there's no real pause from it because the minute I'm stressed, I want to be on Instagram because I can see cute dog videos. But I'm not only seeing cute dog videos. I'm not only seeing giraffes and, self-care videos. And I'm not really hearing good stuff and people on holidays, which may also be triggering to some people. But different things trigger different wounds. And that's a reason why people may say, hey, I'm being more triggered than I thought. And they're not wrong. Different things are triggering different parts of you. And depends on how much is being triggered consistently that the overwhelm forms. And then our eventual inability to cope, if it's not balanced or brought back down. Because if it's overstimulated, it has to be brought back down to stimulation. It has to be brought back down to grounding.
How do we recognize this? Because what you have mentioned is something which is for us, it's in everyday life. It's very normal happening to every single person in life. And when it is so normalized, we feel it's absolutely normal. It is not something which we have to look into. So, how do we recognize that this is something which is triggering us, which is shutting down our body operations mentally, physically, everything?
So, one thing is, you're not wrong. We begin to get desensitized, right? And very often you hear, I'm numbing out my feelings. I so often hear clients saying, it's too much. I'm just numbing it out because cannot deal with this today. Like I have other things going on. Now, just because we numb it out does not mean it's not affecting us, does not mean it's not getting stored in our memories, in our body parts, in different elements. You hear about something triggering, automatically your body tightens, your neck stiffens. It is getting stored in your body, even if your memory is able to suppress it. An emotional reaction is felt. You are going to feel emotion. You hear something happening to someone in the country, you hear something happening to someone somewhere else. You hear something happening to a dog or a cat, there is empathy. There is natural reaction in human beings to want to connect, to want to be good people who feel something for someone else. So you're not feeling. And you're feeling something. The question is, how deep rooted is that feeling and what is the intensity of that feeling? And how is that feeling perceived? Now, I may be perceived to take action and go on a mission and see what I can do to empower people. I may be in a way saying, oh my God, the world is going to crap and I don't know what to do about it because this is just too much. Everything I see is showing me that the world's a horrible place to be in. Now, both these realities may also exist in the same person, right? But different reactions at different points in your day, time, based on what's going on around you, may trigger different reactions or responses from you. Now, sometimes you're able to let them subside by self-soothing, by taking breaks, by saying, hey, this is too much bombardment. You see, right? People doing digital detoxes. My point is, again, a digital detox will only go so far because when you're done, you come back on it, right? And it's not a permanent solution. But what I often tell clients is, if the digital detox helps, do it. But also bring mindfulness and self-care into your routine. Can you go for a walk without your earphones in, without music or a podcast or an audiobook? I have so many clients on their way to work will say, hey, I'll do additional studying. So I'm on the way to work, but I'll have my podcast in or I'll have my audiobook in for whatever information I need. And you're neither concentrating on driving, nor are you concentrating on the book. Or if you're in a cab, you're still aware. What am I doing? So with all of that, our bodies are getting more and more stimulated. And from our smart watches to our smart TVs and our smartphones and the smart rings and everything that's getting smarter, our bodies are getting more juiced towards being overwhelmed all the time, because people who didn't care about their heart rate now know when their heart rate is spiked and when it's decreased. They know their blood pressure, they know this, they know that. And it's a lot of information all the time. And sometimes to reduce sensory overload, it's also about going into your body and saying, how can I reduce it for me? Can I sit and watch a sunset without any noise? Can I cuddle my dog or child or partner without being bombarded? Can I just have a minute where I hug and someone hugs me, or I just hug myself? Because that's also very soothing, right? Because why do people have anxiety blankets? Because it is, again, that degree of weight and pressure that soothes your nervous system. So large parts of it that actually make a lot of sense. That's very easy to do. But then the dopamine and the serotonin hits that you get when you scroll on Instagram almost feel like an addiction because you want it. You want to be relevant. You want to know what's going on versus saying, is it okay if I don't? Because what does my body need? Can I check in? And like you said, can I start noticing? Can I start becoming aware of what's going on inside of me rather than only focusing on what's outside of me? What does someone say about me? What did they think of me? Did I perform well enough? No, if I do this, people will think I'm stupid. But what do you think? What do you feel? What does that person bring about in your energy?
Actually, मैं बहुत सारी information थी because it was so relatable, and I was the the more you kept on saying, and the whole like my entire day was flashing in front of me. Me watching the Instagram, and I was like, sorry, I can't watch this reel anymore. It's too overwhelming and just scrolling up. And then I adopted a kitten just because I didn't want to feel lonely. I wanted some people love and care about, and reduce my anxiety, and not just be on my phone. And now my day starts with her meow. Like
We will have a level of responsibility to feed them after that being there.
she'll wake me up in the morning. Listen, you need to wake up. It's 8 o'clock. I am hungry. And it's nice because earlier I just used to get up, go on my sofa, get my tea, and just look outside. And I'm like, something is missing. And now I have something. Like I have to get up, get my tea, play with her, give her food, and another whole day, just goes on. Personally, there's something I have mm, realized. I might be wrong, but I feel like, I mean, the emotional traumas or any kind of traumas between men, how men like go through it and what women go through it, it's very different. How does trauma for women work? Like, how is it in their life? In they're juggling their careers and caregiving, relationships. Like, we are doing so much, and sometimes, and usually when we grow up, it's always told, it's always told to us, you need to give, you need to take care of this person, you need to take care of your husband, of your parents, of this thing. But we are never taught to take care of us. Most often when I come across a lot of women who are going through something, and I tell them that, you need to seek a therapist, there's a lot of trauma which is going on, and you need to, that will help you out. The response I often hear is, this is normal. Like, what are you talking about? This is not trauma. This is like, she's also going through that, and doesn't mean that everything is like trauma.
And I think that's you, we answered your own question and also did what little bit of what I said, right? Which is so much is normalized because when we pick friends who are similar to us, it doesn't sound like we had a narcissistic parent. It doesn't sound like we had neglectful caregivers. It doesn't sound like and I'm not saying everyone's a narcissist, right? Or everyone's being fully. But we pick up friends like ourselves. Even children who feel secure are more likely to choose friends who are more secure because biology plus just the way you interact is different, right? And you end up picking people similarly. And if you look at it as we grew up, we may outgrow certain friends because friends who met us at certain points in our lives may be very different as we grow or as they grow. And we may drift apart, grow apart if we don't keep coming back to align, repair different parts of the relationship because as we heal, they may heal or they may not. And part of it is to meet each other where we are at. Right? Now, to come to your question about men and women experiencing trauma differently, I am going to use the Indian context in this case, right? First, let's start with biology. Women get their period, which is life changing. And back in the day, it was 13, 14. Now, as young as 10, 11-year-olds are getting their period. Now, if we look at that, by the age of 10 or 11, for you to be able to change your pad in school, be aware of shame because when your skirt gets a stain, sometimes it can be traumatizing. And if you're in a poet school, you're trying to explain to a boy about period shame or you're being shamed for it, right? Or you're being teased about it. Because very often I've even seen in schools where sex ed for boys is different from sex ed for girls. And especially if it's a boys' school and a girls' school, and girls' school sex ed is so menstrual focused. Now, again, at a very young age, you're learning a lot of responsibility. You're not just learning personal hygiene, you're learning personal responsibility. You're becoming very aware of, and this may be a bit heavy before I go ahead, and I do want to put it out there, but it is a trigger, right? Sexual violence, sexual know-how. Girls are introduced to it way younger because maturity hits you the day you hit your period. But just because you've got physical maturity does not mean you've actually got the emotional maturity. In some cultures, they celebrate the period. And so often I've heard my young clients get very traumatized, or even my older clients say that was so traumatic. We had this cousin and this friend who came for this, and they're like, why do we need a party for this? Other cultures where women are not allowed into the kitchen if they get their period, and not just mothers and grandmothers, even young girls, right? And you have to announce it, and it's looked at with so much shame. Now, that itself is a form of trauma because you're already carrying shame for something that's biological and natural. Whereas men may or may not even have an education. If you're raised in an all male household where the only other woman is your mom, you may not necessarily know about periods. You didn't have a sister who talked about her pad or her stain or her cramping or anything or bra sizes. So, all of this may seem exciting or completely confusing because you've never heard about it. And all the boys, what do they call it, locker room talk, is a certain way of understanding the world. Whereas for women, that's traumatic, right? And there's already a distinction in gender in not just our hormones, but how we experience our gender, our sexuality. And we're not even talking orientations at this point, right? And my point is there's so much complexity to it that is cultural often. Different cultures and their own perceptions to it, and also upbringing. How does your family handle it? How do they handle maturity? How are the boys in your home raised? How are the girls in your home raised? Because if your boys are raised differently than the girls, the expectations are different. We already have an idea of what it's going to turn out into. So, if you say, how do women become a version of themselves? Trauma is very, very differently understood by women because there is so much emotional labor that they have to carry. There is so much of understanding that they may not really know this, they may not understand it, they don't have the biology, and you're doing this from the age of 10 or 12. You're being shamed for your body, where your poor, small, tiny body is now growing into a woman's body, and you are putting on fat deposits in different parts of your body. Your body structure is being changed without your permission. You are being shamed if you put on weight, lose weight. If you're a flat chested person like I was, traumatic. And then you eventually get the body of your dreams. You're like, oh crap, now I've put on weight. And there's no ideal structure. And I've even met models and some clients who are models where they'll be like, at every size, if we look back, we were perfect. But some agent somewhere made us feel like we were not enough. And it's somehow, and I was just watching this reel the other day, so a friend sent it to me, where it spoke about when we praise men, we praise them for their achievements. Oh, have you seen that person who has achieved this? Have you seen that person who achieved that? Oh my God, he did this and he did that and he got a promotion, he won an award. But when you praise women, it's very often, and this is so true because I often say to my session, what a good daughter in law. See the amount she did for her mother in law. What a good mother. She sacrificed her whole career to look after her children. She didn't even worry, she focused on her children. Oh my God, look at this. And my point is, for women, the accolade is based on what they've done. Of course, that is beginning to change. But if we look at our mother's generation and some parts of our own generation,
It's still the
relevant.
it's still the same.
And yeah, and very often that's the thing you take to your kid if you're unaware, because you're doing the same thing with your kid because that's what was done to you. And there's no space or change. And that's why what you said is so important, right? Go to therapy. Because at least someone can break that cycle. Someone can become aware of a pattern, identify what's not working, understand it, begin to change it. There will be a truck ton of kickback. But at least there's a beginning of change.
There's so much of denial when it comes to even accepting that, this is not the normal mindset, or this is not normal what you're going through or giving and everything. That when the word therapy comes into the picture, the first answer is no. I have no brother. Oh yeah,
Go.
yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, that. I mean, these days at least people, this generation still doesn't say hopefully cuckoo, but at least my parents, yeah. In my parents' generation, they're like, "Are you mental? Are you crazy? Why don't you go with therapist?"
Yeah. No, there's so much of undoing, so much of unlearning. And I'm grateful that with our generation, for all social media's work, there's come about so much awareness. Right? There's so many people talking about so much. And good or bad, it's out there, so it's undeniable. Right? Even if you want to deny it and you can measly say it does not exist, it's not a popular opinion anymore. But when I was doing my master's, people were like, are you going to work in a mental hospital? Are you going to work in NIMHANS? Outside of NIMHANS, is there a job? And I was very clear I'd run my own private practice. Oh, and I'd be like, no, I will do private practice. And for almost 8 to 10 years, I did private practice before I started the Unopened Box, which is like one big private practice with many micro practices. This. And I am like, I mean, when I say big again, it's small and contained because it is trauma focused. But my reason for saying this is we do see clients, and I'm grateful that our youngest is 5, our oldest is now 92. But while we have that, like for my 92-year-old, I always tell her she's my rock star because at 92 to want to change, a lot. It's a lot, right? And the number of men beginning to come in, I am very impressed. Men, in fact, today I had a client reach out saying, hey, I know my wife sees you. I want to see a therapist in your organization. If I can see you as well, I want to. But if not, I want to see someone. And I'm like, cool. You can either see someone in our organization because your family therapy unit or couples therapy if you'd prefer, but I'm happy to have the conversation with her permission. And I was like, yeah, cool, get her permission and let's talk. And in fact, she gave me a number. So I'm like, okay, that's incredible. It gains. And we work across India. So in my head, I'm just like, I'm seeing the change not in a specific geography, yeah, but I'm seeing it across. And it's really, really pleasant to see. And more than pleasant, let's be open. It's very, very hopeful. Because in my head, we change what we're doing now. Hopefully, the next generation of people we raise will be people who are aware of all these things and bring some change.
It makes my heart really happy to hear that men are coming to act Jonah therapy. Is I came across this reel a few days back where this lady was like, she had a lot of past trauma due to men in her life in her childhood. And she's going through this, she was taking this new therapy, which was womb healing. And in the womb healing, like all the women were sharing how they had these traumas or from the men and how, slowly and slowly the healing was helping her. But what she was essentially saying was, I am doing the work, I am doing the healing and everything. But across my timeline, through any therapy I have gone through or something, I've never seen a man going and actually taking that effort of taking therapy and healing themselves. So why should only women do it? Like, I'm doing it, I will do it because I want to be a better person. But why is it only women who are doing it or non-men doing it? So just hearing that a guy is taking that step is like,
In all honesty, you know how hectic my schedule is. I have a 70% currently, almost 70%, 68% male clientele. So, but that is intentional. I send more of the women to my team, not because I can't handle it, but because my point is working with men is very different. And I think being able to see both sides of what they're going through is important without the judgment and the anger and the shame. And as therapists and as people, we are all people. Sometimes you can have perceived judgment, you can have perceived ideas of how it needs to go. And it's important for the men to also feel safe, right? And first of all, they're acknowledging that they need help, which is a huge deal. Second of all, to share about their own personal traumas, whether it's sexual abuse, and that is so often with men and so hardly talked about, which is really sad. And then neglectful parenting, the idea that, hey, my sister got all the love, but I got all the responsibility. Or I didn't have any siblings, but dad and mom were permanently either fighting or going out or leaving me at home, or dad had all these expectations of how I would do what dad wanted. And I was a man of the house before I even hit 18. You hear so much of it on a regular basis that you say, wow, it's changing. And of course, I do switch it up. I don't only keep it heavy male because for me, I also like couples therapy and the other parts. But in my individual sessions, I try to see that we have, and I think almost every therapist in my organization does work male clients as well.
that's
Yeah.
really, really
So whenever
incredible.
you get a new male client, I'm like, and there are so many. Like now, when people say, "Oh, male clients, we don't have any," and I'm like, "Oh, I have quite a bunch." So I'm aware and I'm happy. And very often, a male will refer another male because they feel safe, and I'm like, I'm good with that. I'm good with getting the males in because there's so much healing that can happen. We've even had male support groups, by the way, where we've had a lot of males come in. We had a male group, a male NGO that hosted a men's mental health thing, where a talk, and the males were fantastic. I think my oldest man in that group was as competitive as my youngest boy in the group. And this, you could see both these were the leaders, right? The older guy and this young guy. And I'm like, wow, guys, like, well done. So impressive. And they were so open. And I was literally the only female in the room. And my
Wow.
best friend, he's like, well, you're not afraid of being swallowed. And I'm like, there was a guy. There was a guy. Clearly had to explore, and both my older gentleman and my younger one both came together, and not that anyone needed saving or protection, but the way they articulated points from two generations, I was like, man, it's just like 2 hours of a session and you guys are just on fire, like good.
Wow.
You can see that where today's
Wow.
safety they also speak, because very often males don't speak to males about vulnerable stuff. Like I grew up with the thing where I don't know who it was, a friend or someone's parent saying, a man needs a woman and a woman needs a woman. And that's so true. But I think if men learn to need men in a way that is emotionally vulnerable, a lot of change can come.
I think we can have a podcast just on that, on men's. Okay. There is this topic that we've touched, that we choose friendships and bonds which are very similar to the traumas we have experienced, or they actually help us form those friendships, right? So, um, is this called trauma bonding?
Not necessarily, right? Trauma bonding is very different, where it may not necessarily be where you're getting much from it, but somewhere you've convinced yourself that this trauma is okay. But it could just be forming friendships based on relatability. So, say for example, and I know this one kid, I mean, now he's an adult, but this person who, as a kid, had a very abusive household. And he was like, Leanne, how is it possible for me to have 5 friends? And everyone had abusive households. So he said, I expected an abusive household. And I fell in love with my wife, and she's got this loving, nurturing family. And he's like, my first ever Diwali with them, I couldn't manage it because everyone's so loving and everyone hugs. He said, I went and put my hand out, and my father in law, he was just like, come, give me a hug. And everyone hugged me, and he was like, oh, we got married just before Diwali. So for him, it was just like, he was like, my body went into shock. Because in my parents' house, in my friends' parents' houses, we only got shouting, screaming, noise, you know, plates being broken, things being broken. And here I found this wife. Now, my reason for intentionally using this, A, related to the previous topic we spoke about, but more because we can also make good choices despite our healing. Because as we grow through life or through our own healing journey, we may realize, hey, this is something that I've seen, but this other person may be something that I want, and it may dysregulate my system because it's highly unfamiliar. I do not know this. I do not know what a hugging family is. I'm still going there hoping to shake hands, and uncle is just like, come here, let me hug you. And all the uncles are hugging, and you're like, ew, why are you hugging? But part of it is the hug felt good. Deep down, the hug didn't feel like a violation. The hug didn't feel painful. And at the end of the day, I deep down get it because my wife was raised by these people and my wife is a loving human and I chose my wife, right? So when you connect all these dots, healing is possible.
How do you take that step of choosing people outside of your pattern?
Very good question, and really very important question, because I hear this so often, and I always say I love working with cycle breakers because I believe anyone who chooses to go to therapy is a cycle breaker, right? Something didn't work for you, you're choosing to be different. And part of it is a choice. It's uncomfortable, it's unfamiliar, it's not known to your body, but you're still allowing yourself to say, it's scary, it's terrifying, but I'm taking this because I want to be healthier for me. I want to be healthier for the next generation if I plan to procreate. I want to be healthier as a colleague, as a friend, as a person in society. I just want to be healthy.